Good afternoon, everyone. Connect with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading on social media. On Facebook and Instagram, like the page Campaign for GLR. On Twitter, follow us at Reading by Third, and on LinkedIn, follow us at Campaign for GLR. We're also on Instagram now, so just dropping that in there. Once again, welcome everyone. My name is Leah Cruz, and I'll be behind the scenes helping to produce this conversation. So before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge our enterprise and programmatic funders, as well as our individual donors. Your support not only allows us to hold these vital conversations, but it also helps us create meaningful opportunities to share insights, foster connections, and build the CGLR community. So thank you. And as we get started, we have a few housekeeping details we wanted to share with you. First, we'd love for you to introduce yourself in the chat box. So use that one. It's at the bottom of the screen to share your name, your city, organization, or your school. And be sure to select everyone when typing in the chat box so we can all know who's here. That's also a place where you can share your thoughts and insights throughout the duration of the webinar. You are in listen-only mode, but you'll be able to engage there as well as the Q&A box. The Q&A box will dedicate the last portion of the webinar to respondents actually answering questions from the Q&A box and sort of throughout the webinar as well. So if you have questions for the panelists, that's where we'd like you to post them. The webinar is being recorded, and everyone will receive the recording, a link to the recording, as well as all of the resources, the bios, the slides we use, and everything at the end of the week. So that will come to you on Friday if you're registered. And lastly, before we wrap the session, we will have a brief survey that comes on screen about 10 minutes before the end of the session. And if you could answer that, we would really appreciate it. It helps with our commitment to continuous improvement. And I did want to call your attention. We do have some upcoming sessions that you can register for. The links for these will be dropped in the chat now. So we have a funder conversation next week, actually about early math. So if you joined us for any of our early math sessions over the years, this is another one. This will be with Math Talk and Heising Simon. So that is on 15th. That's next week at 12:30. And then in our regular 3 o'clock spot next week, we have Equitable Literacy Instruction Part 2. So this is a follow-on from January about the science of reading and making sure that's working for all children. On the 22nd, we have a peer exchange. That's with United Way Worldwide and Ascend at the Aspen Institute. And that is another follow-on about effective communication and telling an impact story in our messaging during turbulent or difficult times. And then we'll have another follow-on on the 22nd to our Beyond the Ballot session from January. Did child policy predictions hold true from what we thought was going to happen? So this will be occurring around the 100-day mark of the new administration. And with that, I would like to introduce today's moderator. Roberto J. Rodriguez is the former Assistant Secretary for Policy and Planning at the United States Department of Education. He is a nationally recognized leader in education policy with over 20 years of experience in government and nonprofit sectors. He served as Assistant Secretary at the U.S. Department of Education under President Biden and as a senior advisor in the Obama White House. Rodriguez led key reforms in early education, workforce readiness, and higher education access. Roberto will further introduce himself as he comes on. So welcome, Roberto, and thank you, everybody, and I hope you enjoyed the webinar.
Thank you so much, Leah, and welcome, everyone. I'm Roberto Rodriguez. I'm your moderator and host for today's session, which is Decoding NAEP. Frontline educators reflect on the pace and progress of learning recovery. Earlier this year, on the heels of the most recent NAEP results, the Campaign for Grade Level Reading launched a webinar series to really unpack our nation's report card and help inform the response to the learning gaps that we're seeing across our public education system. These have been really valuable sessions. And today's discussion is the 7th in that webinar series. You know, over the past weeks, the campaign has explored these NAEP results with data experts and researchers, with parents and families and communities that are supporting our youth in and out of school, with our state school chiefs and those implementing federal and state policy in red states and in blue states, and of course with many other state and local voices. And these have been really wonderful discussions. I'm particularly excited about today's discussion, and I believe it's going to be among the most important that we'll have on this topic of the nation's report card, because it affords us the chance to learn and engage with those that are rolling up their sleeves on the front line of this challenge to accelerate learning and progress in the face of these results in our schools. So over the next 90 minutes, we will dig in with two fantastic panels, and you'll have a chance to hear first from three accomplished district leaders and superintendents that are at the helm of urban and rural communities on the front line of contending with this data. And we'll hear important insights there. Our second panel will then provide some insights, and these are from my friends and colleagues that are leading the charge from the classroom and preparing the current and future cadre and generation of teacher and instructional leaders that are in our schools. I really want to thank all of our panelists for joining today. And thank you for tuning in, for being part of this discussion. As Leah mentioned, we'll be asking for your questions throughout the conversation today, and you can use that Q&A box to put your questions in at any time in the conversation. Our goal with today's discussion and with the insights and help of our panelists today is to make better sense of two important issues. The first is around the pivots that might be needed in teaching and learning, as well as the adjustments and structural changes that might be needed in our schools and districts to respond to some of the challenges that we're seeing in the NAEP data for our students. What do we know needs to change in reading and math to help our students accelerate their progress? The second is to better understand how we might really explore the implications for how we prepare, develop, support, and advance educators that are at the front line of this challenge. How might we build the teaching profession and move it forward to be able to meet this charge better? And how do we do that in a climate where we're facing a national teaching shortage and we still are facing challenges in terms of helping our teachers ensure compensation that's competitive with their peers? I hope, of course, that our panelists will weave throughout their conversations and insights the connections between practice and structural change and policy change, particularly given that I love to sit at the intersection of policy and practice, which I've done across the course of my own career. So before I bring our first panel up and delve into our discussion, I just want to share a few brief points that I think might be helpful context for our conversation today. The first is around NAEP itself, which is such a valuable yardstick for understanding student achievement across the country, gauging our nation's progress in reading and math across 50 states and 27 districts. NAEP keeps us honest, in a climate where standards and assessments, benchmarks, and indicators shift often across 50 states, across 15,000 school districts. The NAEP is the one constant benchmark for proficiency and for progress in reading and math. I've relied on it over the course of the years as a policymaker on Capitol Hill and at the White House, and later as I coached and developed exceptional leaders to really drive instructional change in places from Chicago to Philly to Los Angeles when I was at Teach Plus. NAEP has been an important metric and an important data point. In 2002, we saw a sharp decline reflected in the NAEP results. That was a true reflection of the effects of the global pandemic, right? We discussed those results at that time at the press club, and it was connection to the impact of the lost instructional time that we saw in our schools, the once-in-a-lifetime disruption that all of America's teachers faced in March of 2020, the effects of absenteeism as our schools reopened. And certainly, we're continuing to contend with the challenges of that pandemic. But in this year's results, I believe we are seeing an even clearer call to redouble our efforts for acceleration in reading and in math on all fronts for all students, and particularly for those that are the furthest behind. We know this because as we look at these results and unpack them, we see across the board declines particularly in reading, some of which are unprecedented in scope. We know that our reading scores have been down 2 points from the prior assessment in 2022 and nearly 5 points since 2019. So we're at a moment now where nearly 40% of our fourth graders, a third of our eighth graders are reading below basic levels on the NAEP. And a handful of states and districts have shown some progress in math from 2022 to 2024, particularly in fourth grade. But again, here we are contending with precipitous drops from even in the 2022 data, an 8-point drop in math. And again, nearly 40% of our eighth graders and nearly a quarter of our fourth graders are working below basic levels in math on the NAEP. So there are, of course, exceptions to that trend and some promising practices and bright spots that I hope we'll get into today. But make no mistake, both in the magnitude and the urgency of these results, we are seeing a challenge that I believe is one of the most important challenges we are facing in American education today for the moment that we're in. And I am hopeful because there are so many leaders across the country in our systems and in our classrooms that are moving swiftly to address that challenge. Let me just share a couple other recent data points for context, and then we can get into our conversation today. One is around how we think about high quality instruction in our classrooms, which I know we'll get into with our panelists. New Gallup results show that 20% of educators in the public only 20% are very familiar with high quality instructional materials in mathematics. And fewer than 1 in 4 schools have a shared definition or a shared understanding of quality in their curriculum and their materials in math. So that begs the question of whether we're doing enough to make sure that we're equipping our teachers to use the best materials, curriculum, research, and pedagogy to move instruction and to move achievement in their classrooms. The second data points really related to the massive change that we've seen over the course of the past years here in the use of educational technology in our schools. 45, our students use on average 45 unique ed tech tools over the course of their school year. We know that 1 in 4 students today use ChatGPT for their schoolwork, and 81% of school leaders say that AI is impacting their systems, yet only 10% feel well equipped for that seismic shift. So better understanding those trends in ed tech and what they mean for learning and for engagement for our students is critical for unlocking both the potential and for addressing the challenges that we see with the rise of ed tech in our schools. So these are just a couple of themes. There are many more that I know we'll get into today. I'm very excited and grateful to all of our panelists for joining us. We're going to go ahead and move into our first panel today, and we're joined by 3 esteemed leaders that are at the vanguard of instructional change in their systems. Andrea Berry Brown, who is the superintendent of schools in York, Pennsylvania. And Dr. Brown has an esteemed career as as an educator, as a teacher, administrator, and principal in Maryland before she came to Pennsylvania. She's a firm believer in the importance of teacher mindset to driving instructional improvement. I'm pleased we have with us Dr. David Moore, who is the superintendent in Indian River County, Florida. Dr. Moore is a superstar in Florida. He is the Florida Superintendent of the Year in 2025. And he has led over the course of the past several years massive instructional improvement effort that has helped raise the bar and move Indian River County forward in the Florida rankings across districts. And then finally, we have Dr. Joan Dabrowski, who is the Chief Academic Officer in Baltimore City and works alongside Sonia Santelises, the fantastic CEO of the Baltimore City Public Schools. And Baltimore is such a dynamic system. It has demonstrated its leadership over the course of the years, particularly in the pandemic, when the district leaders rolled their sleeves up to respond and work closely with parents and communities to make sure that student learning was maximized during that disruption. They're also just one of a handful of districts where the NAEP scores in math have improved, actually, based on the 2024 results in grade 4. And they've improved both at the bottom of the pack as well as at the top of the pack. So that's certainly a bright spot that we want to learn more from. The full bios of all of our panelists are included in the chat, and I invite you all to take a closer look at those. And without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get into the discussion. And I really want to hear from each of our panelists on this first panel about this first question, which is, really to, as you're leading instructional change, I want to hear what you make of these recent scores in reading and math. What do you believe needs most attention? And how are you responding dynamically in real time to these trends in your respective school districts? And why don't we start with you, Dr. Moore, if you could just share some of your insights there, and then we'll make our way through the panel.
All right, thank you very much. And to be very honest with you, in Indian River County, we've wired ourselves to think and learn fast. And when you look at our results from pre-pandemic to today, we're actually in a better academic place today in reading and math than we were before the pandemic. So for me, and you were referencing a piece of it, all the different ed tech that's out there and available, as good as so much of that data is and information is and resources are, sometimes it pulls principals and teachers in many different directions. So one of the things that we have done has been very strategic in ensuring that our leaderships have all of the data available to them at the touch of a mouse. So rather than relying on ed tech, we house all of that data together. We provide it to them in one clean system and we provide that data aligned to our district strategic plan. So we are providing data in real time and then connecting our practices into that data system. So we'll look at the instructional coaching that's taking place. We look at our high yield instructional strategies. We conduct observational data. So we're looking at real time data as well as the impact of instruction. And we force the conversation around what does good instruction look like and how fast can we make decisions that are as close to kids as possible. So I think some of the outcomes that we've been able to realize over the last several years has been solely about ensuring that we can understand the impacts of instruction and make a instructional shift based on that data as quick as possible. So rather than waiting 3 weeks or 4 weeks on a topic assessment or even a mid-year assessment, we're able to evaluate the things that matter the most, determine where we need to change or shift that impact in order to improve outcomes. So, solid curriculum also for us. We are, hold ourselves accountable to providing our students with really solid instructional materials. So our curriculum is founded in the science of reading. All of our training and resources are in real time. So we don't do professional development in February, and that's the maths department's professional development. We're very strategic in evaluating where are the struggles with our principals, struggles with our assistant principals and teachers, and provide very specific development aligned to their roles in order to ensure that we're growing them as quickly as possible. So those are just some of the few things that we're doing.
Thank you, Dr. Moore. So much in play there in Indian River County to respond. How about in Baltimore, Joan? Can you talk to us a bit about how you're making sense of these reading and math scores? What actions are you undertaking, either leading up to these trends or in response to these trends?
Yeah, so good afternoon. A real pleasure to be here. So in Baltimore, similar to what my colleague is saying in Indian River, we are very much invested in using real-time data to inform on-the-ground changes and being responsive to it. Under Dr. Santelises, Baltimore City has invested in high-quality instructional materials and have been doing that for close to a decade now. And that investment, we believe, is really paying off as we see these results coming in. I think particularly in the area of mathematics, we have, again, done a lot of work to ensure that our instructional materials are paired well with our diagnostic tools so that these things work together and again are predictive of then our state assessment. So all of these tools working together. The other piece I want to really emphasize here in Baltimore City is our investment in instructional coaches. So making sure that in our schools, there are content leads and experts to support our teachers. And so for teachers, that support is right around the corner, right down the hall from their classroom. And it's in real time. It's sitting during planning time. It's helping unpack lessons so that exactly the right pace and the right focus of those lessons, very granular level support is part of the everyday experience. We have a lot of early career teachers in Baltimore City. And what we know is those teachers really benefit from that in-house professional support that allows them to get that just-in-time need as they're making their way through very complex curriculum. So I would say certainly our investment in high-quality materials, our investment in coaching, and our strategic use of the data we have has really helped fuel these results we're seeing.
Thank you, Joan. Both of you have mentioned the importance of the strategic use of data and evidence for driving your improvements. How has that data or other formative data in your system informed the type of training, the type of professional development, or the type of leadership opportunities you provide your teachers in your systems? I'd love to hear kind of how you think about that data in how you adjust in real time teacher development. Joan, can you maybe start us off there?
Sure. So as chief academics, there is always the traditional space of academics being one side of the district house, and then there's sort of the school principal supervisor side of the house. And so in city schools, in Baltimore City schools, we call that the academics and the schools team. And what we've learned over the last 4 or 5 years is that we've got to be sort of locked in arms together around this data, because as the academics team is working and developing curriculum and supporting professional learning development, we have principal supervisors, we have system deployed specialists in math and literacy going out to our schools, getting real time on the ground data on what's working, what's tripping people up. And so the central teams, we come together every week to be learning from each other and with each other so that we're trying to really interrupt these silos that are very common across districts. And this idea that there's the academics and the school sides, we are joined. And we think that's been a game changer for us because we are able to hear that, wow, there's this particular unit that is really tripping people up, or the pacing is taking longer than we expected. And so we're hearing that in real time and then pushing out updates and changes. In addition, because we have coaches, those coaches come together every month. And again, those objectives, while they're arced out for the year, we're also working and being responsive, and we change and we pivot as we get data from the field. So I think for us, that has been a real important sort of focus on making sure we are active in our use of data.
That's fantastic. And very much in keeping with the trend we're seeing across state leadership as well, where they're making big bets on coaching to really try to drive reading and math improvement across the country in various states. Dr. Moore, how about in your system, how do you think about evidence and data in shaping the professional development and professional learning for your educators?
So for us, we've invested a lot of time in identifying who makes which decisions in our organization, and clearly defining, is that an instructional coach decision? Is that a assistant principal decision? As we want to learn as fast as we possibly can, every decision point based on that reflection or the evaluation of data leads to a change in practice. And when you don't have the ability to define who is making which decisions, you have decision fatigue or no decisions being made at all. So it is the mantra across our system, making decisions as close to kids as possible. So not only defining who is responsible for making which decisions, while at the same time making sure if I'm not responsible for making that decision, I know exactly who ultimately is responsible for making that decision so I can go and provide them. A lot of our information that we look at, we don't design professional development over the course of the year. We're going to evaluate professional development based on practice. So similar to Baltimore, we have what we call, vertical and horizontal teams. And I break the silos by never creating silos. So my assistant superintendent for teaching and learning will meet with me and the operations assistant superintendent and really force the dialogue around the impacts of operating and running a system, and what's the impact on instruction and vice versa. Really just coaching them on what are the impacts of the reality, because we're talking about one student in one classroom, one principal, and our silos cannot pull away decision-making or really focusing in on the main thing, which ultimately is teaching and learning. I do the same thing with our district support team, as well as, instructional coaches and assistant principals. So for every position in the district, we have a parallel position in which we're forcing the dialogue, the conversation, to make a defined decision so we can get back to the classroom. So we're designing professional development for next month based on, hey, we just had our mid-year assessment. We need to be able to make sure principals and assistant principals can disaggregate that data, lead to meaningful instructional change. How is that information getting to kids? So we design development in real time based on where we are on the calendar year in order to ensure that we are in fact moving as fast as possible.
It's great. I mean, it really sounds like there's strong common ground between both of your systems with respect to adherence to a strong instructional core and great high quality evidence-driven materials across the system. And yet we also know we need that and more intervention, particularly for our students that are furthest behind. And I know in the Biden-Harris administration, we focused quite heavily on helping to support and scale high dosage tutoring, helping to support and scale efforts around curbing chronic absenteeism or expanding out of school time to support student success. What are there additional levers or strategies? Are there additional interventions beyond or in addition to the high quality materials and instructional core work that you're doing in your systems that you're seeing promising results from? Joan, go ahead.
That was the opening question. So one of our biggest returns on investment is maximizing our wraparound services, the organizations that are out there who want to do this work and partnering with them. So there's so many not-for-profits that are running our after-school space. Learning Alliance is one that we've worked for years. And rather than making, hoops for them to jump through, it really is coming in and saying, hey, let's work shoulder to shoulder. Let's provide the alignment of the resources that we have during the confines of the school day and align that after school support. So we're addressing the deficit of the child versus just randomly throwing an intervention, an after school intervention that isn't focused at the need of the child. So really, really taking the time to maximize those relationships in order to ensure that the appropriate content is being used, the training is being provided, is absolutely significant in some of the returns that we've had, as well as dosage. For us, interventions, should start on day one. We understand where kids were. They were with us, most likely they were with us during the summer. We don't have to wait a significant amount of time. And then being very strategic in evaluating the impact of that intervention, evaluating the impact of the individual providing that intervention. So it's, when we say that we want to learn fast, we're just not learning about the outcome that a student is producing. We're also evaluating all of the services that are being provided to that child and able to scale back. Do we need to expand this intervention, or do we need to not fund it at all? Is it the instructor, the leader who's doing it? So when we're saying that we're trying to learn fast, it's about absolutely everything that's in touch with the child.
And that relationship with those other partners in your district, Dr. Moore, you're seeing that yield measurable improvements in your data?
Oh, absolutely. Because we're pulling it, we know which organization is working with which kids. We put our eyes on it as well. And I will sing it at the rooftops. These are the organizations that we need to expand. And these are the organizations that we probably don't want to expand. And it just helps keep the entire community of not-for-profits honest and legal and focused in on the right things, because we're going to be so public with our practice, or in this case, public with their practice in terms of the outcomes that those organizations are having.
Yeah, thank you. And Joan, how about you in Baltimore? What's been the role of some of these supplemental intervention strategies or levers to improving the bottom line in reading and math for you?
Yeah, so I think we're super excited about the work we did in tutoring. So in those years, right out of in the midst of the pandemic and through, Baltimore City was a leading district on just the volume of tutoring. We were tutoring over 15,000 students at one point, and really making sure we were doing that during the school day. We had a wide range of vendors and partners helping us in that work. And our tutoring team really did that vigilant work that my colleague in Florida is talking about, just really watching to see who was doing what, working with which student. We paid attention to dosage. We were watching that attendance, because we realized, it's great to have a kid scheduled for tutoring, but if they're not getting to tutoring, you've got to get all the way to the finish line. What we learned, which was really exciting and promising, is that our own homegrown tutoring model, which used our paraeducators, anchored in our instructional materials. So what it became is actually a double dose for students rather than a separate program. But that intervention yielded the best results. And so when we tracked their growth on our diagnostic, we saw more kids moving out of that well below and below category and getting on grade level in the area of literacy. And so when we look at our literacy results, and while our NAEP data stayed flat, when you couple that with the education report survey scorecard work that came out of Stanford and Harvard, you see the level of impact of Baltimore City that the pandemic hit in terms of how far our students fell. But you see this incredible growth that they have come back, and the outlier that Baltimore City shows in terms of our gains and outpacing many of our large urbans. And so we really do think our commitment to tutoring has been a game changer, as well as the extended learning services we provided both after school and in summer. Again, huge summer programming focused on that intensive literacy and math acceleration. And again, watching to see where we could prevent that summer slide. All of those things, I think, contributed to sort of that work, alongside, again, investing in coaching, high quality materials, and then strategic use of that data.
Fantastic. That's great. Thank you, Joan, and congratulations on just being such a leader across the country with respect to the scaling of the high quality and high dosage tutoring. We know there's so much great evidence around that effectiveness there. So I want to shift and ask you both a bit about how you think about innovation and the role of innovation alongside evidence-driven and effective practice in your systems. How do you think about advancing innovative practice, human-centered approaches, student-centered approaches to learning? How do you think about that in the context of your current practice and do that without compromising instructional depth or strategic depth with respect to reading and math? I know, Dr. Moore, you've been a leader on that work in Indian River. Maybe you can help get us started there.
Yeah, so it's very, very strategic for us. Building the systems to improve the quality of instruction was job number one. So a lot of work over the course of this year is about ensuring the principals have the ability to sustain and grow that work moving forward. So we've invested so much in strong systems on how we improve the quality of instruction. We need to shift to innovation because in Florida, this is a very, very competitive game in terms of who's going to receive the dollars, pretty much anybody, in order to educate kids in Florida. So if we can't innovate and meet the demands of parental choice, ultimately public education is going to continue to decline. We don't want to do that at the cost of not ensuring that the instruction that is being provided at school sites is able to be sustained. And when I say sustained, just not the same practice. It's been designed in a way to empower teachers to reflect on the realities within their classrooms and empowered to grow instructional shifts and changes in order to continuously meet the needs of kids. So we're doing that work now and then forcing ourselves to get into really, really looking at what innovation looks like. And I'm just not talking about school themes. I'm talking about time in which we're dedicating to specific content areas. We're talking about the ringing of bells and why do we have to be in the same number of minutes for 6 classes a day in the secondary space? Makes absolutely no sense. How are we integrating some of our arts and music programs across all grade levels versus saying each school has to have an elementary, then a middle school, then a high school music teacher? Really, really questioning what has been the confines of what the perception of what public education is. So once again, training a thought process, a thinking process led at the district level, then implemented at school sites and allowing that innovation. A large piece of our innovation this year is really going to focus around small, intimate, unique experiences for kids in which there's a strong sense of community. So really, really building schools as being a hub in the community. And when you need something or you have a need or question within the community, that you're going to look directly to the network at your local school in order to meet that community need. So we really, over the course of the next several years, we think we have really, really high levels of deep thinking around instruction, but we want to really kind of take the shackles off around what innovation looks like and be nimble and quick enough to make the changes that most public schools are really afraid to make. And I think what you're going to see in the coming years from Indian River County is grade configurations that don't yet exist, the grouping of teachers and thematic units that are only really just being taught about or thought about in order to really take a competitive edge on earning the right to educate the children in our community.
Love that. Thank you. You know, these creative designs and pedagogies from the bottom up are so valuable. When you talk to school principals, it's one of the first things you hear is their desire for more room to innovate and more agency there. How do you think about that, Joan, in Baltimore with your system, and how do you balance that innovation with the importance of adherence to strong evidence-based practice?
Yes, no, I think an area that we are really leaning into is our embrace of this notion of the full continuum of learners, and this idea that we have been siloed at the schoolhouse and sometimes how we think about how we support English language development and how we support students with disabilities. And there's a real moment for us right now to understand that that separated approach isn't serving students as well as it should. And so this opportunity to innovate around how we think about inclusive classrooms, more than just a buzzword, but what does that really mean for how we approach professional learning? And we're actually learning this from some of our folks in the early learning space in Baltimore City. So we've had some outstanding kindergarten readiness assessment data that's come out over the last few years, even outpacing the state's sense of readiness in the state of Maryland. And what we've noticed as we've gone back to say what's going on in that early learning space, we realize that classrooms are set up as inclusive spaces. General educators sit right alongside special educators, being trained together, teaching together, looking at data together. And we're saying, well, why do we stop doing that when they come into kindergarten and first grade? So it's a moment of real sort of transparency here of we've got to do better for our students. We see a lot of children being identified for services. We have a shortage of being able to find qualified special educators. So the model of trying to perpetuate something that's not working necessarily as best as it could for children or for the adults has got to be a space for innovation. And so I call on everybody who's here today to help think about this with us, because I have talked with colleagues across the country, and this idea of how we have to reimagine special education is a space that I'm keenly interested in. And it is something we are leaning into here in Baltimore. It's a space we've got to innovate. And I will also say on the AI side, I want to just lift up some great work that's happening there. When we think about really teaching to grade level, know we've got really robust, complex texts and concepts. We're starting to use and play around with AI tools to help with that scaffolding, to allow students to be able to access and give the AI support, the AI assistant, to do things that a teacher maybe not be able to can't do at scale, but have that AI tool. So we're seeing some promising results there in terms of kids being able to access content through an AI assistant, which again, pretty exciting to see. And again, those are the things that I think we have to dig into here in Baltimore.
Fantastic. Applaud so much your leadership and passion for helping to design differently and better for our students with disabilities. So needed. Joan Dabrowski, David Moore, thank you both so much for bringing your voice to this conversation. And we will see you shortly for our Q&A. I know that our audience will have many more questions and insights that they'll want to glean from you. Let's move on to our next panel to really hear from our educator leaders and those that are developing our teacher leaders. As well as those that are directly in the classroom rolling their sleeves up to contend with these challenges. And to ground us in this conversation, we have three fantastic individuals. The first is Dr. Peggy Brookins, who is president and CEO of the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, who has led NBPTS for the last 10 years. Peggy is a tremendous leader who has made big moves to build the future of experienced and accomplished teachers in our schools, and has been one of the most insightful partners that I've worked with to support the teaching profession and to make sure that we are building a talented and diverse profession moving forward. Thank you, Peggy. We have Evan Stone with us as well, who is the CEO and co-founder of Educators for Excellence, and is one of the most innovative and creative leaders, I think, in the teacher leadership movement. I'm so glad to have Evan with us. He's been a great collaborator and continues to ground his leadership in his career as a sixth grade teacher in the Bronx, where he started. And we also have with us finally Arthur Everett, who is the national board member for the E4E, Educators for Excellence, and is a veteran social studies teacher and support services teacher in New York, known to his students as Mr. E, the recipient of distinguished and numerous awards, including the Empire State Excellence in Teaching Award, and was formerly a Teacher Ambassador Fellow many years ago, serving at the U.S. Department of Education. When I was Assistant Secretary for Policy at the Department of Ed, I relied very heavily on our Teacher Ambassador Fellows to help inform and shape many of our policy directions and discussions. Thank you all three for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and kick us off here and ask each of you to share a bit more perspective from where you sit about how you think we should be interpreting and thinking about these NAEP results. What do they tell us about the current state of teaching in our schools? And I'm going to ask you, Peggy, to kick us off.
Thank you, Roberto, and just so happy to be on with the panel and the previous panel as well. And when we think about the NAEP results, I just want to say this right up front. This is not the failure of teachers. I want everyone to know that. It's a reflection on the ongoing challenges that our system faces. And the two panelists you heard prior to this talked about innovation and what we need to do within the school systems in order to innovate in ways that have an impact on students. We have seen these declines in math and reading over the years. It's been long-standing. And there are a number of things that we can do, and they talked a little bit about the foundational literacy and numeracy, how we bring others into the classroom, how we're not working in silos and separating students with special needs from the regular population, as people would call it, over time. And to think about how we attend to academic recovery and how we do that in an equitable way. And so for me, it is always about teachers. It is always about the investment in teachers and how we develop teachers to come into a classroom to be equipped in ways that, you know, they are overstretched at this point. And I think the most important thing we can do for them is support them. Make sure that they are looking at data in ways that they are addressing these gaps. They're the people who are doing this work on the ground. The National Board for Professional Teaching Standards is something that, you know, has always been near and dear to me. I was just in a classroom renewing my own certification and looking at, you know, the time I've been out of the classroom and coming back to a classroom, all the changes, even in a short period of time that have occurred, but just how students learn and the needs of students are very different now. So the quality of instruction is critical. It has to be high quality. It has to be reflective. It has to, you know, make sure we're paying attention to measurable differences and strong instructional practices. And I think the data is telling us that, and how we disaggregate that data is how we can make informed decisions within the classroom and make innovative changes that are absolutely necessary.
So well said, Peggy. Thank you. Evan, how are you thinking about the moment we're in here, and what do you think it says about the current state of teaching in our schools?
Well, great to be with you all. Thanks, Roberto, for the kind introduction. And I learned so much from the previous panelists, so it's hard to build on what they all said, but I would just say that NAEP tells us that our student achievement is in crisis. And I think when I think about what we learn about that for our teachers, I would say the teaching profession is also in a state of crisis, and we need transformation for both. I agree deeply with Peggy's comment that teachers are not to blame for this. When we ask teachers across the country, only 19% of them would tell us that they would recommend the profession to others. Only 16% of them across the country would say the profession is sustainable. And so as our schools have, I mean, as our economy has transformed, our schools have not kept up with that in many ways. And the way we structure the profession has not kept up with that. We have a student population that is radically different in our country than it was 100 years ago. And yet we still drive most instruction the same way. And so I was really inspired by the last conversation to think about what does innovation and transformation look like? And I agree with Peggy. How do we drive that from the classroom up to ensure we're structuring both the supports, the training, the how time is used throughout the day in a way that centers what teachers tell us is most important, and what the data shows us is driving outcomes for kids. So I would say we have a system that is clearly failing our students, and it is also failing our teachers. And so we should utilize that information and think about how we build it back different or better. So that's broadly how I'm thinking about the profession in the moment.
Thank you, Evan. +1 to all of those wonderful comments that you and Peggy shared. And I want to get into some of those pivots and shifts we need to see in the profession and in our schools to better support our teachers. Before I do that, though, let me just ask you, Mr. E, thank you for being with us, for taking time from your students to be with us. Talk to us about how you're seeing teachers make sense of this moment. What a moment we are in, with both the NAEP results and all that's swirling in our schools and in our systems. How are our teachers finding motivation and hope to reach forward and tackle some of these challenges?
Thanks for the question, and I'm so happy to be here and honored to be representing teachers. And I want to just say that I definitely appreciated the first panel, and thank you, Roberto. You're doing a great job. So I'll get to the motivation, but I just want to say, to me, for that first question, I think the widening gaps between our highest and lowest performing students is what is kind of standing out. And just to dovetail onto Evan's point, I think it is a reflection that the system is not designed to address the gaps that we're seeing. And so teachers are kind of maybe locked into some performative and administrative things or old ways of being. And so innovation, I think, is needed there to address those widening gaps, because currently the systems are behemoths, and behemoths move slowly, and they're not able to pivot to address these gaps. So that's my take on that. Now, in terms of motivation, I think that's a really difficult question to answer. I mean, our survey of teachers, our 2025 survey, indicated that when they asked teachers what was their favorite part of the job, out of 9 choices, the top 2 were, I believe I'm making a difference in the life of my students, and I enjoy building relationships with my students. And so that resonates with me as a teacher, right? It is about the relationship building. And it is about, the motivation is the difference that you're going to make in the lives of your students every single day. However, I also think that we romanticize, I think in the popular notion, we romanticize the role of a teacher. The movies and human interest stories about the superhuman teacher who did above and beyond for the 30 kids in their classroom is kind of upheld as like, that's what being a great teacher is. But the reality is, I don't know that happens 90% of the time. For those of us who do try to go above and beyond and who can, that is awesome. But that is not sustainable for a system that is designed to educate students and citizens how to participate in a democracy. It's not sustainable. It shouldn't be built on the idea that you have to, break your back in order to be considered a good teacher. So I think we're motivated because what other choice is there? But I also think that there needs to be more recognition that the system is not working, and it should not be on the back of individual teachers to uphold the system.
That's just so profound, Mr. Everett. Thank you. You know, you speak so well to the values and the drive and the motivation that draws our educators into the most noble profession, right? And that's something that's been constant, you know, for years going back. And yet the need for us to update urgently how we think about the profession and support and value our teachers to equip them for success. Let's get into that question a little bit more and maybe start with, I'd love to hear each of your views on how we think about teacher preparation and teacher development over the arc of our educators' careers. You know, do we need to be thinking and addressing these NAEP results through our pre-service programs in different ways? Do we need to be thinking about induction and mentoring and early career success for our teachers in different ways, or the advancement of accomplishment and talent in our system in different ways than we are doing right now? What do we need to change there? Peggy.
That's a huge question, and I'll try and answer my part of it and say it in that way. I think it's imperative that pre-service in conjunction with in-service begins to see the gap between what we see theory and practice. And we get so much in theory, but we are not embedded in the practice of the reality of what is in a classroom today. And if pre-service, anybody who is a professor in pre-service has not been in a classroom, they have no idea as far as what the current reality is unless they are deeply embedded in clinical practice and are part of this cohort that they send out into schools and to measure what is happening versus what is being taught. And don't get me wrong, we need theory. But we also need for teachers who enter the classroom on day one to be competent, to have a sense of a deep content knowledge, and to have a sense of pedagogy and how to deliver that deep content knowledge based on the relationships that they've formed with these students in a classroom. We have to start making better connections to what teachers should know and be able to do in the current context of what they will face, whether they're in urban, rural, online, wherever they are. Students need teachers who are prepared to meet them where they are. And we talk about this across the continuum. The National Board has worked for years with pre-service institutions with something called ATLAS, Accomplished Teaching Learning in Schools. It's a case library of accomplished teaching. The 5 core propositions of what teachers should know and be able to do, and that explication is free to everyone. And we want to embed that in pre-service. That expectation of, I enter this, pre-service, this is my profession, and I want to become an accomplished teacher, but there are clearly articulated steps along the way in order to get there. I am in full belief in residency programs and how residency can prepare you with that mentoring piece to enter the classroom, not as an individual, but as a collective who is supporting you. And I loved what Dr. Moore and Dr. Dabrowski said about supporting teachers. It is not just about the curriculum support. It is about the support in how do we teach? What do we need? How competent do we have to be? And where do we get those experiences so that when we get into the classroom, children have those experiences also? And I think, for myself, the 5 core propositions and my mathematics standards were a wow for me. And the impact that I could have on engineering students was just amazing. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. It's that gift that keeps on giving.
Love that. Thank you so much, Peggy.
And maybe I can just build on that for a second, because Peggy, I just want to double down on what you said. First, I also love that you're like still a teacher in your heart, and like it just comes through so clearly. But I think this idea of content knowledge and clinical experience is so important, and that like with any profession, it's ongoing learning. So it is the pre-service and the ongoing professional developments. But what I think it was NCTQ released a new report today that showed only 16% of undergraduate teacher prep programs provide enough time to learn fundamental math concepts. So we know that that content knowledge is not being built in our teacher prep programs. And we need to start to say that's not okay. But we also know we're not going to solve that overnight. And so when we get teachers into our systems, we need to do what you just heard in Baltimore, which is this example of we need to ground the professional learning in the curriculum that teachers are using. That you need to have the content built into how you are learning to do the teaching. That if we separate out ongoing professional development or professional learning from the actual content that teachers are teaching, we're going to have huge gaps in performance. And the research behind this is so clear and so evident. And then the last thing I would just say is that we need to structure the profession so that we can deliver on what Peggy described, where we can have master teachers working with novice educators. When we ask teachers the most important thing, the thing that they want more than anything else, it is opportunities to collaborate. They want to be working together in partnership to serve students. And we've structured the profession where we do what Arthur described is force every teacher to be a superhero and leave them alone in their classrooms without the support and guidance that they need. So I think we're trying to think about the structural shifts that will allow the instructional and pedagogical changes that Peggy described.
Yeah, thank you, Evan. Arthur, what do you make of the state of teacher prep and teacher development in our schools, and what do you think needs to change there?
Certainly, I agree with Peggy, thank you, and Evan, that pre-service teacher programs need to be more flexible and responsive to be able to pivot to cover what's happening in front of the kids who are in those classrooms. You know, since I did a pre-service program, you know, there's AI, the trauma-informed teaching, students with disabilities, multi-language learners. There's so many, society is moving so quickly that the students 4 years ago are completely different from the students today. And those programs, I believe that there needs to be the content, although I will just say, the kids do not care about your content. They don't care about that, right? We as teachers care about that. And we as like academics care about that. The kids don't care about that. What they care about are how are you making the content relevant to them? And that's more to me about how can we teach teachers to be collaborators, co-collaborators in the facilitation of learning, which I was not taught that to become a teacher. That's something that I had to learn being in the classroom with students. So I think the programs need to be a little bit more strategic, a lot bit more strategic. And I do agree that even those professors, it is an ongoing lifelong learning profession. You don't just get the degree and then sit on your laurels. You have to continue to be out there in classrooms, seeing what's happening, and having the time and opportunity to do research and getting that support so that you are able to, on day one, deal with what is actually happening right now.
Boy, that's such a good point. You know, and both in your comments, Arthur, and also Evan, what you mentioned, the need for creating space for our teachers to lead and learn beyond the four walls of their classroom, beyond the isolation of those four walls, just seems so profound. What for all of you, is it time for us to rethink the role of teachers in our schools, or the structures that dictate that role of teachers in our schools? And how might we think in a more creative way about that?
I think for me, leadership is key. We have mentioned mentorships. We've talked about teachers who are doing jobs and doing them well. I know there are so many board certified teachers around the country who serve as mentors. The research is saying that new teachers who have board certified teachers as their mentors, the impact on their students is amazing. 6 months almost of learning that can occur when a new teacher steps in and has a mentor who understands what teachers should know and be able to do. And I think the PLCs that we put together, led by teachers who understand how to do this work, who are content competent, as we would call it, and think about making decisions based on data and the data of their students, not just general data, but the students in front of them and their needs. That's one thing I love about our component 4, the effective and reflective practitioner, is focused on data literacy and also focused on assessment literacy. How do we look at, formative assessments and make changes on the fly? Because we have that data in front of us, as Dr. Moore and Dr. Dabrowski was talking about earlier. We have to be adaptive in the classroom every day, every minute. It is critical that you make those decisions real time. And I'll say this about some work that we've been doing with Charles Fidel, who has really jumped into the AI space about how we can help teachers even think about planning lessons and then implementing those lessons in classrooms with forethought about the people in front of them and the questions they might ask, how they might be tripped up, and save time and incorporate that within lessons, and then use it to say, how do I look at this data I've just received from the instruction I've just given to change instruction to meet the needs of those students? And I think we have to have more collaboration in that way and have teachers lead this work because they are the people doing this work.
Thank you. Evan or Arthur, any reflections on the role of the teacher in our schools today, or what structures need to change there?
Arthur, you go first.
Okay, thanks, Evan. Yeah, I was just gonna jump in to say, I think schools and the role of teachers, and we've said this, are still trapped in the industrial model, where schools were a place to send kids so that parents could work, and so that students could learn how to participate in an industrial society. We are so far removed from that, and schools have not changed. So that's one kind of innovative change that I see is like the overarching thing. Um, I I think still teachers are expected to control the class, to like control or police the behaviors of students, the location of students, um, and then also deliver content, back to that word, that is going to help them pass a test to say that they were in the class and they got that content. Um, I think the innovation needs to happen. And while I do believe that tests are a great way to get data, although we know that there is some implicit bias there that needs to be addressed and things like that, I would also say that schools are not set up for kids to actually perform what they learn or to learn by doing something. Um, and so just thinking about more performance tasks, more real life work, more uh, um, opportunities to engage students in a way that reflects what we expect adults to be able to do, most schools are not equipped for that. And that takes a lot of restructuring, a lot of rethinking, that takes administrative changes, that takes flexibility in time. And these are hard problems. The solution, it will not be easy, but it needs to come from, certainly teachers need more voice in how better their time could be used, what they are feeling and seeing that their students need. I think there's an opportunity for a lot of contractual things to change, because some of the contracts, not every place has a union or whatever, but some of those contracts are tied to again, that industrial model of it's about these hours that you have to be in the place. It's about the number of kids in your room, and certainly those regulations are helpful, but they can also be restrictive and then also de-professionalize the role of the teacher in terms of being that co-collaborator or being able to have the autonomy to say, this is what I think my kids need, or this is the way that I see that my kids are demonstrating their proficiency, even though they might not have scored well on a particular exam.
Yeah.
And I'll stop there.
Yeah, and I'm going to try to thread these two pieces together, because when Peggy described the like ideal professional learning community, every teacher wants that environment, and many schools are structured in part because of the contracts like Arthur described, where that's really hard. It's hard to have the shared release time. It's hard to have the coaching roles established. It's hard to have the day built around that. But I actually think strong contracts and flexible conditions are not mutually exclusive. These two things can come together. Flexibility and prescriptiveness lie along a spectrum, and it's possible to exist somewhere in the middle that provides some structure for collaboration and work to happen without it also being a free-for-all in buildings. IFRI did some work in partnership with Columbia, the CFRL Center at Columbia, to research where contracts are enabling that. And so I think what you hear underneath all of this is teachers absolutely want transformation, but they want a voice in transformation. And we can do that in partnership with labor, where we come together to say, actually, how do we create flexibility in a school to allow that ongoing learning to happen, to allow us to develop the types of assessments or measures that Arthur was describing. But right now we have built a system that creates tons of friction in the ability for teachers to come together and collaborate in meaningful ways. And so that means shifting how we use time, shifting how we use pay, shifting how we think about class size, not to have massive size, but to allow flexibility so that veteran teachers could take on more, or you could have groups of teachers working collaboratively in some settings and not others. So I think there is a way within the confines of structure to also create meaningful flexibility to allow real innovation and elevate the profession through that work.
Thank you, Evan. I so want to get into some of the other bright spots that you see around innovation that help us challenge and move forward these conventional norms around how we think about teacher leadership and talent for our teachers. I hope we can get into that in the Q&A a bit. Let me thank you, Peggy, Evan, Arthur, for being with us and for those wonderful insights. And let's go ahead and open our conversation here and invite Dr. Dabrowski and Dr. Moore back in. It is time to hear from you all. Your questions, I saw a lot of hearts, a lot of applauses across the course of our discussion today. We really want to hear what's resonant for you in today's discussion. What additional wonderings do you have for our panelists today as we dig into this a little bit further? I'm going to go ahead and kick us off here and say, let me see, there's one question we had. This is a question that builds on Dr. Dabrowski's point around school leaders and educators collaborating around data for our students with disabilities. Wondering if there's anything that the panel might want to build on further with respect to how we think about the needs of our students with disabilities in the context of the NAEP data and the quality of instruction.
Well, maybe one thing I will throw in the mix to this, we're working on this issue in a number of states because there's just also massive vacancies around our special educators. We're having a really hard time recruiting and retaining special educators. And we should be honest that what we're asking of our special educators is a far more difficult and complex job. And there are some places around the country, like Detroit is a great example of this. They've gone from having hundreds of vacancies in previous years to having just a few now because they've thought differently around compensation. And they said, we're going to pay our special educators $10,000 more per year because we had teachers that were leaving special ed to go to general education for a more sustainable life. And so how can we incentivize that? But it wasn't just compensation. They also decreased caseloads, decreased paperwork. allowed the job to really focus on the core instructional components and dramatically increased the level of support and development for those teachers. So I think we need to be honest about the significant challenges of being a special educator right now, and make sure we're resourcing and supporting those teachers and allowing them to focus on the core work of instruction, while still making sure we're complying with the needs of IEPs and the paperwork that goes along with it. But how can we differentiate who's doing what parts of that job?
And I'd also just like to add, thanks, Evan, because I appreciate that. I am a special educator, and I realized that the education that I received before I became a teacher is not the same type of education that I think that all teachers would benefit from. So I think also part of the issue is we have siloed special education when really any teacher has between 20 and 35 personalities and different ability students in front of them. So then I think rethinking the teaching profession and the pre-service programs to really incorporate the core understandings of neurodivergence, of differentiation, of psychology that general education teachers don't get, would then also make everybody more equipped to deal with all the differences and all the kids that are in front of us all the time, as opposed to making that separate. Because I mean, I still have colleagues who just say, oh, well, your kids, that's an IEP kid. And it's like, well, everybody's an IEP kid. I'm an IEP teacher. Like, what, we're all different. And so I think that would also go a long way in terms of leveling the playing field in terms of the teacher's capacity to deal with all the students that are in front of them. As opposed to saying,
Wonderful.
oh, this kid doesn't belong in my class, and so they should be tested for this or that. It's like, no, if you had that skill set, then you would be able to realize you need to be differentiating. Here's an opportunity to be able to change your instruction to reach that student that's in front of you.
And I think some of these innovations we've seen in the past, whether it's RTI or PBIS or other models that break down these silos between gen ed and special ed, have just been so powerful for how we think about students at the center. It's a great transition to another question we've received here around students and collaborating with students. And we have the audience wondering, what are some strategies to support educators as they learn how to better respond to student needs and to better engage students in lessons and in learning? Anyone want to take that?
I'll jump right in really quick. I used to teach a course around the country called Foundations of Effective Teaching. And Lovely Billups was a researcher, and she always said 3 = 33. And, you spend the first 3 weeks getting to know who is in front of you, getting to understand their strengths, their weaknesses, their hopes, dreams, aspirations, and then what they're interested in and what hooks them into learning every single day. Make them a part of the lessons that you create by the conversations that you're having with them. And so when they walk into the classroom every day, you are both speaking the same language because you have listened to them, and they can see it within the lessons that you've created for them. And this is the thing that creates an environment where children feel safe and they feel like they want to learn because you have invested in them, and they can see it very clearly in those lessons that you're creating. And these are engaging lessons that they experience the lesson. You are not a disseminator of information at the front of the room.
Love that. Thank you, Peggy.
I would just add on that with AI coming into the picture, we have such an opportunity really to create move away from content and put teachers at the front of that lesson, ensuring that we are ultimately creating lessons designed for students versus going through a program or a sequence of content, really figuring out how we can, yes, get to know the students, and then create an experience for them that is aligned to the standards, but individually designed to meet their specific needs.
A tremendous potential there. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Moore. You each have seen, for our audience, a poll pop up on your screen. We encourage you to fill that out for us. That helps give us valuable feedback on today's webinar. We're going to continue the question and answer period here. We have one question that's carrying forward from previous webinars around the role of families and the role of parents, and wondering how we consider the role of families in instructional improvement and in boosting student success, and what have been some bright spots around partnerships with families and parents that you've seen, either at the school level or at the district level.
I'd love to jump in a little here about some great work that Baltimore City committed to as part of our sort of rolling up the sleeves and making sure all families and children came back for in-person learning. We knew we needed to create a sense of trust and partnership with families as we were welcoming them. And that was back in the fall of 2021. And there was a lot of work around student learning plans. So every child having a plan as they were coming back sort of in this pandemic space. But a huge part of that was an opportunity for student, teacher, and family to sit together. And I think building on what Peggy was talking about, really learning about that child. What were their motivations and the excitements that they loved about school? What were things they were worried or scared about? What did they really want to learn in the year ahead? And making this become a living, breathing plan that would guide that learning for the year. And we have held on to those learning plans. And at first there was a thought of like, well, how does this work? We've already got IEPs and this is another plan, but we really worked to try to integrate this so that we could make this a document that would stay with the child over time and become a living, breathing space for them to be able to really set goals alongside the teacher and their families together. And we found that parents have really appreciated. They look forward to the conversations. That we put in all of the academic data, but we also put the other parts of school, which, again, going back to some of the earlier comments, kids are going to school for the relationships, the connections, the club, the sport they play, the fine arts activity that they enjoy. And so these plans became spaces where we could see all human beings represented, our young people in the fullest way possible. So I would just lift that up as a real authentic way to engage families. Parents love and families love to talk about their child. And we've got to find ways for them to have an audience and space where educators are right alongside listening and learning about that child.
I'm seeing a lot of love for parent and family voice alongside educator voice in the chat. So thank you for that, Dr. Dabrowski. Okay, this is our final lightning round here, and I cannot resist asking this final question, which again is going to enjoin your perspectives with that of policymakers and ask you to share one policy recommendation that you would urge federal or state leaders to make to support steady progress in academic growth in reading or math in the building or system or network of schools within which you work. So one policy recommendation, and I'd love to hear from each of you, and we will start with you, Dr. Moore. Put you on the spot.
Yep, absolutely. Flexibility. I think if you look at who we have to compete with to earn the right to educate our community's children, it's charter schools who have less restrictions, and then now private school and homeschool would have absolutely no restrictions. So the ability to innovate comes with flexibility. So opportunities to get rid of regulations, dereg some of these policies that are simply jumping through the hoops in order to take the businesses, the school districts who have the highest ability to educate children, leveling the play field, getting rid of some of these regulations that ultimately are impacting our ability to innovate public education.
Thank you, Dr. Moore. Let's go to you, Peggy. One policy recommendation for our federal or state leaders.
You know the answer to this. This is giving every teacher access to board certification, period.
And you've compiled all of the evidence to show what a tremendous driver that is for our students'
Well,
success.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. How about you, Evan?
Just one. This is hard, but I would say I'd like to see state or federal incentives to encourage differentiated staffing and compensation strategies so that we can really harness the power of our best educators at scale to support student learning.
I love this. This is a chorus of teacher leadership in action. So thank you, Evan. Dr. Dabrowski, how about you? Policy recommendation for state or federal leaders to support your wind at your sails.
Yeah, so I'm going to build on the teacher love in the space here, but I do think there's something about teacher leadership that comes out through instructional coaching investments and really investing in that mentoring and support in our schools for our teachers.
Yeah, we're seeing so many states move forward in a great conversation. If those of you who may have missed the state chief discussion, a lot of discussion around instructional coaching coming through there. So thank you for that. And let's wrap up with your perspective, Arthur, from the classroom. We don't do enough to value, elevate, and support the voices and vision of our teachers in policymaking. What do you recommend our federal or state policymakers do to change that? Any one policy change? Wave your magic.
One policy change. So I agree with all the brilliant things that
Well, I think we might have a bad connection.
I think more diversity in the profession along all of the systems would bring in some different perspectives about who students are and how they learn. I think that would also be very important.
Thank you. Thank you, Arthur. Well, thanks to each of you for your insights and for your perspectives on this important webinar. It is clear that the future of our democracy, the future of our economy, the future of our civic society is being decided each and every day in our classrooms and being empowered each and every day by our teachers. So, beginning to take on this urgent work of reading and math improvement begins and ends with supporting exceptional educators and their ability to succeed and with their students. I thank each of you for the work you're doing to that end. And thank all of you for tuning in today for your questions and for your participation in today's webinar. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Michelle for any final words.
Thank you so much. And on behalf of the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, I just want to send my deepest appreciation for all of the panelists for taking the time to share the thoughts and insights on how we can champion our educators and students. And to you, Roberto, for your thought leadership in designing this session and for being our moderator today. And of course, a thank you to all of you, our participants. I do hope that you'll join us for one of our upcoming webinars that you can see listed here. And we hope to see you soon. Thanks all.